The two men in court were shot dead. The first bullet shattered glass and silence alike. The second tore through the stunned gasp of the audience. Screams rang out. Jurors ducked under benches. The bailiff shouted for order. Reporters threw themselves to the ground, cameras clattering against the wood. In the chaos, the two masked intruders staggered forward, collapsing onto the courtroom floor with a heavy thud, blood darkening the polished surface. When guards pried papers from their stiffening hands, the room shifted from panic to bewilderment. The documents looked identical to the evidence Mark Gerard, the assistant district attorney, had already presented earlier. But these bore Kelvin Grant's true signature, real and authenticated. The judge slammed his gavel, calling for recess, but the room erupted into whispers that couldn't be contained. If Kelvin's real signature was on these papers, then what had Gerard shown earlier? And what did that mean for the man sitting in shackles at the defense table? When court resumed after the break, fear still hung like smoke. Witnesses later said the two intruders hadn't entered through the main door. It had been too well guarded. They had come from above, breaking in through the ceiling like phantoms descending into a stage play. For Sandra Loy, seated at the defense table, it was more than a performance, it was a war. Her hands rested steady on the files in front of her, but beneath the polished calm was a storm. The sight of those forged documents had rattled her. The whispers, the planted evidence, the staged intrusion, it all meant someone wanted Kelvin buried. But why? Her mind drifted unbidden to the night in Harlem years ago. It had been late November, the kind of bitter night when the city turned hollow and cold. She was 22, carrying two heavy books from the library, her scarf pulled tight against the cutting wind. Every sound was sharper on that empty street. The click of her heels, the wet splash when she stepped in a puddle, the faint hum of a neon sign overhead. When she realized the footsteps behind her had gone silent, fear gripped her chest. She had walked faster, her breath visible in the cold air, and then they appeared, two men, stepping from the alley, faces half hidden under hooded jackets. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be walking alone this late," one of them sneered, flashing a revolver that glinted under the streetlight. "Hand over the bag." Her voice shook when she whispered, "Please, I don't have anything valuable." The taller one raised the gun. That was when another man appeared from nowhere, a dark leather jacket, broad shoulders, eyes that burned with something fierce. He yanked her out of the line of fire, just as the shot rang out, her books scattering across the pavement. The fight was brutal, fast. He moved like a man who had lived too long in violence, fists striking with raw precision. But another shot rang out and his left hand turned red with blood. He barely flinched. "Run," he shouted at her. She couldn't. Fear held her still, even as the attackers fled into the darkness. She had fallen beside him, her voice breaking. "You're bleeding." "Better me than you," he muttered, his eyes locking with hers in a way she would never forget. He pressed one of her books back into her trembling hands. "Keep walking with your head up. Don't let anyone see fear on you again." And then he was gone, limping into the shadows, leaving her with nothing but his face burned into memory, and the scar carved into his left hand. Now, years later, he sat across from her in a courtroom, no longer a stranger in the dark, but Kelvin Grant, the accused. Judge Wallace called the trial back into order. Gerard rose, his slicked-back hair and commanding voice drawing every eye. He loved the stage, loved the jury, loved the power of words. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, pacing before the jurors, "the man seated there is no savior. He is no hero. He is a thief, a murderer, a man who orchestrated a deadly heist, caused blood to spill, and walked away without remorse." Sandra's jaw tightened. She had to look composed, unflinching, but Gerard's voice echoed too easily in the silence, and every word was a dagger meant to bury Kelvin. The prosecution's first witness was the head security guard from Jansen Enterprises, the company Kelvin was accused of robbing. He described the night: masked men, gunfire, shouting. He insisted he had seen Kelvin. When Gerard asked him to point out the man in question, his finger landed squarely on Kelvin. Murmurs rose among the jury. Sandra's pulse quickened, but her face remained carved in stone. When Gerard finally turned and said, "Your witness," She rose gracefully, heels clicking against the floor. "Mr. Lewis," she said softly, voice cool as a blade. "You testified you saw my client the night of the heist. Let us be precise. How far away were you when you claim you saw him?" "About 20 feet, he answered. 20 feet, Sandra repeated, tilting her head. "In the middle of chaos, gunfire, and masked men?" "Yes, but—" "And you're certain," she cut in, "under those conditions you could identify a face, even though your initial report states the men wore masks?" The guard hesitated, sweat dotting his forehead. "Answer the question," the judge ordered. The man swallowed hard. "I thought I recognized." "So it is not certain," Sandra pressed. "It is an assumption." The courtroom stirred. Gerard shot to his feet. "Objection. Overruled." The judge barked. The guard's confidence collapsed. Sandra turned smoothly back to the jury, letting silence hang like smoke before saying, "No further questions." It was a victory, small but crucial. Seeds of doubt planted in the jury's mind. Then came Darnell Pierce. He swaggered to the stand, a wiry man with a grin too sharp to trust. Gerard guided him carefully, and Darnell painted Kelvin as the architect of the crime. He said it would be easy, clean, like taking candy from a baby. The jury leaned in, eager for the drama. When it was her turn, Sandra approached slowly, circling him like a hawk. "Mr. Pierce, how long have you been in custody?" 8 months. "And you face charges of your own, do you not?" "Yeah, but that's unrelated." "Unrelated," she repeated softly, eyes narrowing. "Yet after 8 months of silence, you suddenly came forward to accuse my client, just after being offered a reduced sentence." Darnell shifted uncomfortably. "That's not—" Sandra leaned closer, voice sharper. "When exactly did Kelvin supposedly confess this plan to you? Was it at the bar on 145th Street? The one you denied visiting, until a surveillance tape proved otherwise?" Color drained from his face. His story cracked, piece by piece, under her relentless questions. Finally she delivered the blow. "Or did you simply say what they wanted you to say, to save yourself?" Darnell broke eye contact, his bravado crumbling. The jury shifted uneasily. Sandra turned, her expression unreadable. No further questions. She returned to her seat, pulse hammering but face cool. Kelvin's eyes lingered on her for a moment. He mouthed a single word, "Thanks." But Gerard was not finished. He introduced financial records, neat and damning, tying Kelvin directly to the stolen funds. Charts, signatures, paper trails. It looked airtight. Sandra flipped through the exhibits, her sharp eyes dissecting every line. Then she froze. A signature, familiar but wrong. She rose, interrupting Gerard mid-flow. "Your Honor, request to examine Exhibit 14. The judge nodded. Sandra tapped her pen against the signature. "This is alleged to be Kelvin Grant's signature, but I've studied countless samples during discovery. This one does not match. Not in slant, not in pressure, not in rhythm." She held up another page with Kelvin's verified signature. The contrast was undeniable. Jurors leaned forward, murmuring. Gerard objected furiously. "Speculation." The judge silenced him. The damage was done. Doubt bloomed again. If these documents were forged, then Kelvin's case wasn't just prosecution. It was manipulation, orchestration. Kelvin leaned toward her, voice low, eyes shadowed with something she couldn't read. "Careful, Sandra. You've grabbed the bull by the horns." For the first time, she saw real fear in him. When court recessed, her phone buzzed. No name, no number, just 3 words. "Do the needful." Her chest tightened. Later that night, another message. "Walk away, Sandra. Or your father won't be the last Loy to fall." Her father, years ago, disgraced, ruined by whispers of corruption tied to Janssen Enterprises, the same corporation at the heart of Kelvin's case. The past and present, tangled into one dark knot, pulling tighter with each day. The 2 men in court were shot dead. It happened in a flash, so sudden that no one could believe what they had just witnessed. One moment, Prosecutor Mark Gerard was pacing the courtroom, hammering his points home. his booming voice echoing off the marble walls. The next, the heavy doors at the back burst open. Two masked men stormed inside, clutching folders in their hands, shouting words that were lost in the chaos. Security barely had time to react before the shots rang out. The intruders collapsed, bullets carrying through them, their bodies sprawled across the polished wooden floor. Screams filled the chamber. Jurors ducked. Reporters scrambled for cover. Guards rushed forward. The judge banged his gavel in vain, trying to bring order to a room that had just witnessed death. And in the middle of it all, Kelvin Grant sat motionless, his dark eyes fixed on the lifeless figures. He didn't flinch, didn't blink when the bodies were searched. The officers pulled out the documents the men had carried. Everyone in the room leaned forward, straining for a glimpse. The files were copies, mirror images of the same evidence Gerard had presented against Kelvin. Except for one difference. These bore Kelvin's real signature. Authentic, verified. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Had Kelvin truly signed those papers? Was he guilty after all? Or was someone weaving a masterful frame around him? Sandra Loy sat frozen at the defense table, her pen still in her hand, her heart racing so fast she thought it might give her away. She was a woman who built her career on control, on calm precision. But this moment rattled her. The memory of Harlem came rushing back, uninvited. It had been a Friday night, cold and damp. She was 22 then, still a law student, clutching her books as she walked home from the library. The streets were nearly empty, just the occasional car passing by, headlights slicing through the mist. She remembered how her steps quickened when she realized she was being followed. The men appeared from the shadows like they had been waiting for her. Two of them, hooded, voices sharp. One pressed a gun into the light, telling her to hand everything over. The smell of alcohol lingered on his breath. The second one blocked her way, his eyes hungry with a kind of malice she had only read about in books. She begged, pleaded, told them she had nothing of value. But their smirks told her that wasn't enough. The gun rose, steady and merciless, her heart lodged in her throat. And then he appeared, a man out of the darkness, a stranger who moved with speed and purpose, pulling her backward just as the gun fired. The sound still echoed in her bones all these years later. The books she carried scattered across the wet ground. The stranger fought the two men with a precision that was frightening. Every movement efficient, brutal, final. But in the chaos, another shot cracked through the night, and blood spurted from his left hand. "Run," he barked, his voice deep, commanding. But she hadn't run. She couldn't. She had dropped beside him, terrified, trying to stop the bleeding. He only shook his head, forcing one of her fallen books back into her arms, his lips curving in a faint, almost broken smile. "Keep your head up. Don't let anyone see fear in you again." Then he was gone, disappeared into the night like he had never been there. But she had never forgotten his face, or the scar on his left hand. And now here he was again, Kelvin Grant, shackled at her table, accused of murder. The judge finally called the court back to order, his voice trembling as much as the gavel in his hand. "This court will take a brief recess." When they reconvened, security doubled. Guards at every exit, scanners humming, reporters kept at a distance, but whispers still slithered through the air. Witnesses swore the two intruders hadn't come through the main doors. They had descended from the ceiling, crawling down like shadows. The trial was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It had become a war zone. Mark Gerard wasted no time reclaiming the stage. His voice filled the chamber once more. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do not be distracted by theatrics. Do not be fooled by blood spilled to sway your sympathy. The facts remain. Kelvin Grant is not a hero. He is not a victim. He is a criminal, a man who hides behind shadows and violence. The evidence will show he orchestrated a robbery that left innocent people dead." He called his first witness, a security guard who swore under oath that he had seen Kelvin at the crime scene. The man's testimony was firm, but Sandra rose with quiet strength, her tone cutting. "You say you saw my client during the robbery. Tell me, sir, what time of night was this?" "Past midnight," the guard answered. "And how many men were there?" "4, maybe 5. All masked?" Yes. And amidst gunfire, chaos, masked faces, you're absolutely certain that the man you saw was Kelvin Grant? The guard hesitated, just for a moment. But Sandra caught it. Yes, I'm sure. She leaned closer, her voice sharp. Or are you assuming? Because the prosecution told you he was their man? The jurors glanced at one another. The guard faltered. Gerard barked an objection, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Then came Darnell Pierce, a former associate of Kelvin's. He testified that Kelvin had been the mastermind, that he had planned everything, that he had ordered the violence. But Sandra was relentless. Mr. Pierce, you were arrested for armed robbery yourself, were you not? Yes. And you struck a deal with the prosecution to reduce your sentence in exchange for testimony. Yes. So you have every reason to paint my client as guilty, to save yourself? His voice shook now. I'm telling the truth. The truth, Sandra repeated, her words like blades. Or the version of truth that spares you prison. The jury shifted again. Doubt deepened. But then Gerard played his strongest card. Financial records, bank statements, transfers that traced back to Kelvin's accounts, documents with his name, his signature. The jury leaned forward, persuaded, until Sandra pounced. She held up one of the exhibits. This signature, she said slowly, does not match my client's. Look at the slant, the pressure, the consistency. This is forged. The room buzzed. Gerard objected, but Sandra pushed the point. Someone was planting evidence. Someone wanted Kelvin buried, and then her phone buzzed. She shouldn't have looked. But she did. A message flashed across the screen. Do the needful. Her throat tightened. Another message arrived minutes later. Walk away, Sandra. Or your father won't be the last Loy to fall. Her father. The memory cut deep. Years ago, Jansen Enterprises had destroyed him, ruined his career, stripped his name. The same company is tied to this very case. The same company Kelvin was accused of robbing. The web was tightening around her, and she was caught in the middle. By the time court adjourned for the day, Sandra's nerves were frayed. Reporters hounded her as she walked out, questions flying. She ignored them, heading for her car. The courthouse parking lot was swarming with officers, scanning every vehicle before letting it pass. She was halfway there when a sharp voice called out, "Step back, ma'am." An FBI agent crouched by her car, his scanner flashing red. He reached underneath and froze. Bomb. The word ripped through the air like thunder. Officers shouted, dragging Sandra back. Cameras clicked wildly. Reporters screamed. People scattered, tripping over one another in panic. Sandra's heart pounded as she stared at the car where moments earlier she had intended to sit. Someone wanted her silenced. Someone wanted her gone. The betrayal had only just begun.